TELEPRESENCE, a cyber expo hosted by selected rising thesis students of the MFADT and Technology program. So far, we've had offered 3 days full of events, including workshops, artist talks, and a digital showcase, which will all be available on our website even after today. So please make sure to drop by and have a look at the marvelous work that my fellow students have produced so far. Before we begin our talk today, here's some brief housekeeping notes. So today's talk, Build Your Own Club, will be split in 2 parts. The first part is reserved for a lovely guest speaker to talk about her work and experience working as a creative powerhouse with communities. All the while, I will ask some questions occasionally, and in a second part we have like an open discussion and a Q&A session. Please be aware that this talk is going to be recorded and will be available after the show on our website, mfadt.space, and on IGTV. If you're not comfortable with being recorded, feel free to turn off your camera, that's totally fine. But since this is also a talk about community, we would appreciate if we see a lot of faces and get to hear a lot of what's on your mind. So we are really happy about your contribution. And if you have any questions, please either use the Zoom to raise your hand function or type it in the chat, and we will then call you up to unmute you, and you can ask questions on video if you feel comfortable, or we're just gonna read it out loud for the recording, and Lauren is gonna answer. Generally, also please be aware we have some community guidelines. This is a safe space. We want that everybody respects everyone, and we will not allow any kind of disrespect. And we want you guys to treat each other with respect, care, and sensitivity. Good. Okay, I think, welcome Lauren. Thanks for being here. I think the stage is already yours. Just gonna chime in occasionally.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Hey everybody. Good afternoon, good early evening. I'm beaming at you from Kansas City area in Missouri. I recently moved here with my partner because he got a teaching job at the University of Kansas. So we're enjoying socially distanced teaching and things like that. It's very strange, but up until now, I've been based in Pittsburgh for many, many years. And the projects that I'm gonna share with you and a lot of the approaches and stories that I'm gonna share with you are they all come out of my time in Pittsburgh. And quite honestly, like, I don't know where I'm gonna land. So I might be in Kansas City for a while. I might pop off to another place. So I think in this time where none of us really know what's going on, I think talking about organizing is definitely a really complicated and in a way like an evasive topic. It's really hard to pin down, you know, how to act during this time, whether that's online or in person with folks, where to find your community, whether you've been in a place that you can no longer go out and meet folks in the way you're used to, or maybe like me, where you just drop into a whole other city and place and you're like, where do I get started? So I just want to set the stage and be super clear that this is in no way like a talk about social engineering. It's more like approaches to choosing your own adventure for organizing with and for creative people. So I'm going to just use like my own adventure that I've taken and pull out some projects and approaches that I think kind of resonate even more so with me today. And I hope that they will maybe give you ideas on ways to approach organizing from here on forward. I'd like to also start by saying that like context is everything. So even though these are my stories and the places that I've grown up and been active, your context is very different and your contexts are different from one another. And so you really need to take that into account anytime you think about reaching out and organizing with different people, and nothing is going to be perfect. I also do not claim the title of activist. It's a very specific role and a very important one, especially right now. And I don't claim the title of designer, but I think it's really interesting that I'm like joining you for this talk under this umbrella. I do think that the way we organize together does have consequences in the world of design or in how we design, how we interact with one another. And I do think it does have also consequences that affect everything from civil rights and social justice to the policies that we are making. So I do think that the way we organize needs to be intentional. And I also want there to be room for intuition. sometimes you just have like a gut feeling about someone or something and you really want to connect with them. And I don't think there should be any shame in feeling that way or doubting yourself. You just don't know what's going to happen, so you need to go for it. All right, all that being said, BYOC, build your own club. For me, I keep finding myself swirling around these different areas of interest and activities. I've been very active in nightlife. I've been very active in like the research and curation of digital art. I'm really interested in how cities are made through urban design. And I'm interested in education, specifically how we can kind of dismantle traditional modes of education and figure out ways of sharing with one another. You know, and some of the most common ways, which I'm sure all of you have done, are like versions of skill shares, versions of mutual aid, and things like that. In order to kind of address these areas of interest in my own life, I created platforms like festivals, conferences, projects. And I want to be really clear that like, while I created my own platforms, I did that with other people, sometimes collaborators that I worked with for years, sometimes with folks that kind of came in and out of the picture. And even though that was my own track of projects, I created them outside of like my 9-to-5. So my 9-to-5, you know, was working in a university for a certain point. My 9-to-5 was working in a nonprofit arts center around media and film for a little while. And now I'm just straight up freelancing. And in the background, you know, I've been trying to make my solo project my full-time thing. And now that has just kind of become my everything. So I'm also figuring that out and where I can organize no longer between maybe 2 or 3 worlds, but kind of floating out here alone, completely on my own. So I'm not going to talk about like maybe why technically or aesthetically these projects were interesting at the time or still resonate with me, but I want to talk mostly about the who, how, and where they happened. I took different methods over the years that I still think that these are maybe the top 5 ways that I approach projects and people. Matchmaking, which I feel is like really where my passion comes from, and that's simply bringing 2 people together to create something new and fostering a relationship between creative folks that maybe wasn't there before. Residencies, which is more about an extended period of time for people to get together and work on something. Partnerships, which are interinstitutional relationships. So whether you're like me, where you created your own thing and you're trying to partner with a bigger fish, like a museum, or a peer, like a DIY art space, those are all types of partnerships. Physical spaces, RIP right now, and collectives, which are, you know, groups of people. This is just my brain dump on things that I try to ask myself as guideposts when I'm organizing. I'm not necessarily a fan of best practices. I definitely don't want to be prescriptive in saying you should ask yourself these questions or these are the boxes you need to check. But rather, for me, these are the things I try to ask myself when I'm getting into a project or working through a project. The who, what, where are you, but more importantly, who are you not? A +1 mentality, and that really means like what you're doing is about someone else's growth as much as yourself, if not more than yourself. Crossing at least one bridge, which is about you know, intergenre collaboration or, you know, multifaceted collaboration across disciplines. Being super aware of scale, hierarchy, and geography in relation to yourself and the people you're trying to work with, systemic and legal barriers, personal, external, and internal capacities that you have. Really making sure that you're always allowing yourself to take risks and following your intuition. Always like coveting and really loving experimentation over the thought that you need to create something final. You're gonna fuck it up, all of us do. Just figuring out new ways to be accountable to that. Things are gonna end, everything ends. Sorry to be so bleak about that, but that also offers like a new place for you to revise, recombine, and start over again. All right, matchmaking. Mia, I think you're muted.
I just noticed. Thanks. Okay, first question. Since you have such a rich history of like bringing creative individuals together, do you have like a specific recipe for doing that? And if yes, what are also the values and virtues that you're looking to create when you bring people together?
Yeah, there's there's a lot of different ways. Like, I've been a matchmaker. Sometimes I see that two folks have an aesthetic, they're vibing aesthetically, and I don't think that they necessarily know each other, but I think in the context of live performance, it would create a really awesome show and something that would grow their careers. And like what's on the screen right now, One Optrix Point Never, Nate Boyce, that's a great example where I was like, this is back in 2010. So this is like right when One Optrix had his first release, and Nate Boyce was kind of coming out as a digital artist and like producing a lot more video work. And I reached out to both of them separately, actually. And this was the first festival I ever curated. And I was like, hey, you know, what would you think about doing a live AV show with this guy? And what do you think about doing with this guy? And they're like, well, we actually like found out about each other recently, and we really wanted to do something together. So this is perfect. So sometimes it really is that you're on the same wavelength as other people. In other cases, if we go forward, this case with Jeremy Bailey and the members of Tech Life, RIP Rashad, is that there's a technical interest behind doing this, but really I wanted to bring two people or groups of people together that like didn't know anything about each other, and they're kind of like the odd couple. Like, you would have never imagined that this would have worked out, but it did. And part of it was also inverting, doing a couple inversions. Like, one, the visual artist headlining the same way a musician does, like both of them sharing the stage. But in the reverse direction, I really wanted Manny and Rashad to break Jeremy's code, because he was doing these kind of like digital warrior, like motion capture pieces. And, you know, he was doing a lot of things that were really beat driven and quite fast. And I was like, oh, Manny can kill this. Like, I want to see Manny break this. So it kind of came from just an intuition about something that would be really fun for a lot of people. That also required a lot of communication and trust building. Both sides were like, I don't know what we're getting into here. Kind of scaling up from there, sometimes you see that people are already collaborating and they have built a really interesting relationship. So over the years, I've had the pleasure of working with Sam Rolfs, and Sam and Andy have been working as a duo with House of Kenzo and doing a lot of these like mocap performances and also like live theatrical performances. Okay, so sometimes this is like where I've jumped in as an artist. Matchmaking can also be taken in terms of like a challenge. Like, I love a challenge. And this one was based on the idea that we wanted to see if our asses could rival beats that were being made by Cakes the Killa and Unique. So the idea was just like, can you make a beat as like sick as Unique makes it with your butt? And so we had to figure out just a way to make like a booty harness, like really short, you know, in a short period of time, and bring it to this party. So sometimes they're just sketches, but they bring a whole interesting crew of people together. Similarly, I think this is also kind of an absurd one, but a much larger match or matchmaking. This was back in 2014, but I was watching a lot of like NCAA March Madness, and was thinking about like net art and like just the rise of the GIF. And I really wanted to like pit a bunch of these artists against each other and just see what kind of chaos would ensue. And instead of like being, you know, passively shady like a lot of art culture is, I was like, let's just get it out. Let's just like have a battle. So I collaborated with, you know, 3 different people to get this website made. And then we kind of just let it roll. It was all through voting. And because it's the internet, this is what won. So, you know, sometimes it's not all so like deep and heady. Sometimes we're just like really silly people.
Nice, thank you. Yeah, so the residencies that you have done and organized so far have always kind of included multiple artists rather than single individuals. What was kind of the intention behind that?
Yeah, I think for a number of years, it actually wasn't like a forethought of mine. It was more of an intuition that it made more sense to bring groups of people to Pittsburgh for a number of reasons. Like, one, I just wanted like the +1 or X factor where like more folks were able to engage with each other. I liked how people were working collectively and they had projects that, you know, maybe needed time that could be nurtured in Pittsburgh. And I think looking back on it, working with collectives, like it really takes the weight off of one person. When they're traveling to another place or doing a project, it really redistributes that like social weight on a lot of people. And I think that that's beneficial for the group, and it's also beneficial for the people hosting them and the communities that engage with them. So this one, the background image to this is a photo from way back in 2012 when I invited Baby Castles to come to Pittsburgh, and we did a pop-up arcade. And this was before they ever had their space in New York. So in some ways it was kind of like a prototype of a prototype of a prototype. It was also a way to engage a couple different groups of people. There were community collaborations through like a youth education program called Assemble. And there were collaborations with students at Carnegie Mellon University in the ETC program. And there was also a partnership with a guy in Pittsburgh that just owns one of like the largest gaming cabinet collections. And he just let them like rifle through and go to town on hacking these cabinets. So really pulling like a lot of disparate groups together. Maureen, who was on this conference, I think yesterday or the day before, Maureen with the 3D Additivist Cookbook and Daniel Rourke were residents 1 year. This might seem kind of left field for a music and new media festival, but I think having time to really consider like how we make things and also the power structures embedded in the technologies that we're using is really important. And sometimes it takes having a group that is a bit outside your field to kind of show you a new way of thinking about yourself. So I felt like this residency did a number of things. It allowed them to create the cookbook, have time to like think, talk, write, and also interact with a lot of folks from Pittsburgh. And I was really excited to see a lot of younger artists from Pittsburgh added to the book. So Zach Rispoli's submission I thought was really great. And that if you take a quick glance at it, it really is about like the accessibility of these new technologies. Let's see. Y'all might recognize some of these folks, but this was August Wilson Center Lab, and this was like the mega residency. It was a bunch of collectives together in a residency, and the kind of visiting resident collective was the Yapo repository. And in here, it was about kind of remixing formats. The August Wilson Center is traditionally known as like a theater arts institution, and they had invited a lot of different programmers to do different types of activations throughout the year. And together we had all proposed doing this lab. So it was turning the space almost into like a 24-hour space where there was research and iteration and kind of different world building activities. And then at night, that was still happening, but it was like reflected in a different way. And this project, I think overall incorporated like 50 artists with like a number of core artists leading different projects. The final iteration of this residency was exhibited at the Carnegie Library because it was expressing like new forms of archives. And the choice to exhibit this at the library was simply like the conversation that these archives were having with like a very old institution. And also the fact that it is the most accessible place in Pittsburgh. It's free, it's open all the time. You know, the context was really important for this one. And these are just some like lovely faces that I haven't seen in person in a long time, but this was the core team for the AWC lab. And lastly, sometimes residencies are really about giving a group of people just the opportunity to be together. There can be other like embodied forms of care and performance and kind of innovation that can happen without producing, say, an object or a bunch of things. Purple Tape Pedigree is a label and like media imprint, and you might have had Gang, who's like in the center there, as a guest in some of your classes. But the goal here was to get a bunch of label mates together who had never performed together at the same time under the same roof and give them a week's time to really work together. These are just some really nice quotes that people have given me about how they work, or like how something like VIA through partnership or through like residencies and like matchmaking has supported them. And I pulled Gang's quote from his Instagram, like the day of New Forms Festival, just because I felt like his reflections on like getting away from the stage and really about like the intimate connections that are required to really like fulfill his artistic practice as a performer were important to have in this conversation. I'll just give you a sec if you want to read what some of these folks said. Cool. All right, let's jump. Partnerships.
Thank you. That's lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. On one of your earlier slides, you mentioned this guideline of like to always cross at least one bridge. How would you explain this, especially in the context of creative partnerships?
Yeah, partnerships are really tricky. There's a lot of power dynamics going on. Some that might not be apparent to you until after you went through the whole process. But I think some strategies to take with partnerships. One is begin with a peer partnership and really find ways to mutually lift one another up or share. I think kind of the idea of trades is really important here. If you're in the seat of being a little fish with a bigger fish, you do need to consider like the types of trades that you're making and how that is equitable for you, like both short and long term. And if you're the big fish and someone else is a little fish, you need to kind of think of that in the reverse and consider like various ways that you can continue that relationship or nurture that relationship beyond your own benefit and beyond like the project you're just doing together. So I'll give you some examples of partnerships. The one that you're looking at right here was a partnership among like a number of different groups, Women in Sound, me as VIA, a woman that was working on a documentary about Betty Davis, and Ace Hotel. This was part of the VIA Festival. But this one was specifically looking at like a maternal, what would the word be, like maternal leadership or like just matriarchies in music, and also how like basically networks of women have influenced each other directly or indirectly over time, specifically like from the legacy of Betty Davis. So you just have like some heavy hitters here that I felt really lucky came together for this. And I just wanted to point them out really quickly. On my far right is Renee Scroggins from the band ESG. She like has run this family band since the 70s and is single-handedly responsible for the most sampled bass line in like all of history, like more than James Brown. So to have her there was just like mind-boggling. And you have lots of different folks across the way. Like you have locally in the center, Des Easter, who runs True Tea, which is a trans group in Pittsburgh. You have Jungle Pussy, Anquinique Wingfield, who is an opera singer in Pittsburgh and composer, Juliana Huxtable on the far left, and then Jade Payne, who's a sound engineer. To bring it back a minute and just talk about peer-to-peer relationships. Women in Sound is a magazine that was launched in 2015 in Pittsburgh. The reason how we came to collaborate was that Madeline Campbell, who's behind the magazine, had been volunteering for the festival and came to me and said, I have this idea that I really want to start a magazine, not just about like women performers and non-binary performers, but about like engineers, all the people behind the scenes. And of course I was like, yes, that's awesome. I will do whatever to support this. And that kind of kicked off like a number of years of doing events together where we would do showcase releases. On the left is Earth Eater and More Mother, who were part of the first Women in Sound release. And since then, I would say that like Madeline's a big fish, right? And sometimes I might consider myself a little fish in comparison because she's developed such an awesome archive and network of people that she works with now. This is just a further extension of that Betty Davis talk mothership that I was mentioning. This actually manifested as like a 2-year project where once the documentary about Betty Davis's life was released, we were able to premiere it in Pittsburgh. And the goal there, an idea that I had with the associate director, was to get Betty's band back together. That was the last time I think that they've performed ever. And instead of Betty Davis singing, even though she's still alive, that wasn't possible. So we had different women from around Pittsburgh, different musicians and singers, kind of take up that spirit and do her songs with her original band. So that was like incredibly moving. And it took a lot of moving parts too, to ensure that like you're matchmaking folks, you're doing, it was like all of the above categories that we've already mentioned, right? Like you're matchmaking, you're doing like interinstitutional partnerships. In a way, it's kind of a residency because you're seeding new works. Sometimes all these things are happening at the same time. A last note about this partnership, it started to involve like a lot of national and international companies. Afropunk and Red Bull were involved in this. And it really just kind of expanded rapidly to do a really awesome release show in Pittsburgh. Quickly, Now See This was an interinstitutional collaboration between VIA, the Carnegie Museum of Art, and Carnegie Mellon University. The goal of this project was essentially to kick off the Hillman Photography Initiative, but we took our own spin on it, which was to explore like just different takes on photography, especially digital photography. And so the reason why I selected this project is just, there are a lot of things that came up around intimacy, you know, like kissing and things that we maybe can't do right now with strangers or loved ones or whomever. But what I really loved about this project was kind of even though it was a really big interinstitutional project, there were really intimate moments. So you can see on like the left-hand side, like just setting people up to get the shot. This work is by Roland Leonard, by the way. It's called Crash Kiss. And then the result of those digital kisses on the right. Other aspects of this program were like augmented reality tattoos and like other types of body scanning by artists like Pussy Crew, just to create digital spaces and digital bodies that we could have a relationship between digital space and like our physically embodied space. Another like mega one was Weird Reality, which was a conference around VR, AR, and MR and other immersive technologies. I co-curated this with Golan Levin from the Studio for Creative Inquiry. And what was so great about this was that, you know, we both, I think, come from a perspective of wanting to like undo things. And this was an unconference, I guess, if you will. But it was one of the first, I think, VR conferences and exhibitions that was just really wacky. I think a lot of this was about speculation, a lot of different projects that just were meant to kind of mess with your expectations of this technology. And at the same time, like who was at the table was very important. From the far left, you have Kalani Nicole, who runs Transfer Gallery, who's really established herself as like a leading woman in digital art. In the center, you have a local artist, Julie Malice, who's a digital painter. And on the far right is Deborah Laurel, who is like one of the pioneers of VR and kind of worked in military technologies. This is Andrew Yang, and I threw this in here again because of like the times that we live in. I'm sure like sex games and virtual intimacy and things like that are on a lot of people's minds.
Thank you.
Sorry to like run through it, but I know we're like.
No, this is perfect. Yeah, like I'm not shaking the egg so far. I think we're in good time. So what would you say does collective caretaking of a space, may it be physical or non-physical, actually bring into a community?
Spaces, yeah, these can be difficult, right? Because they're like, they feel so long-term. They're so real. They require a lot of care. But I think that here's some opportunities in spaces. If you have the privilege or luck of getting your hands on a space, I think it's a great opportunity for like the redistribution of ownership, leadership, and investment. I think this is really where, in terms of something that people really can associate, you know, certain financial value and certain power with like having access to a space. So I think that there's definitely a responsibility and opportunity to think about who's running the space and how you're going to run it with one another in a way that can just change the typical dynamics of having a space. It's also like where you can have a self-sanctioned space, like, you know, the rules are yours, barring certain legislation and like legal restrictions, but we could talk about, you know, ways of getting around things. But yeah, it's a self-defined space. And I think with that comes an incredible amount of responsibility and care. What you're looking at right here is, this was years ago, but as I was kind of doing pop-up events and kind of bopping around town in Pittsburgh, trying to find all sorts of different unused spaces to do AV events in, one of the community development groups came to me and was like, do you want a club? And like me and like my collaborator at the time and like all the folks that were like working on VIA, you know, we were all like, what do you mean, do you want a club? And when they opened up the door, this is what we saw. And we were like, I don't understand what you mean. Like, how are we gonna have a club in here? But we turned it into this, honestly, with like a ton of elbow grease and saving up some money to get an electrician and things like that. So this was like a completely self-made space. We brought it back into like working condition to like live its life for maybe a little under 2 years. And in the process of bringing it back into shape, we came across tons and tons of items like these. One thing about when we opened the space is that it was completely frozen in time. Like drinks were on the bar, membership information was in the drawer. And instead of kind of chucking that stuff and passing by it just so that we could open up, it was clearly like a very precious gold mine of like cultural history from Pittsburgh. And one of the interns at VIA during that time, their name was Harrison Apple. They were studying archaeology and art. And I called Harrison and I was like, I think there's something here for you. This is, you know, I've just stumbled upon something incredible. So in the process of kind of going through like an archaeological dig of this club, we also felt a responsibility and kind of just like a deep excitement about contacting people that used to be in the club. We did a lot of research about what it was. We learned that it had a social club license, which is very hard to come by these days. It was a lesbian-owned club, like for the later half of the 20th century. It was one of the few places where there were Vogue balls in Pittsburgh, like in the 90s and early 2000s. There was just a lot of stuff going on there. And so we just started calling people and playing that like phone tree of, hey, I think we have your space. Hey, do you want to get back into this space? And if you're not interested, you know, do you know someone that would be? And that led to a whole bunch of different collaborations and different folks kind of using the space for their events for the next 2 years. On the top left, just photos from True Tea. I mentioned Des earlier. True Tea was like a burgeoning like Vogue and ballroom collective, and they needed a space to do their events that was safe, that, you know, worked by after hours parameters where you start at midnight, all those types of things. So by virtue of being a social club, we were allowed to do that. So yeah, we kind of like picked up where it left off in many ways. In terms of like social clubs today, Hot Mass is really known as a space that has been doing a lot for nightlife culture. Hot Mass exists by virtue of the fact that it is situated within a membership and social club. That private club has existed long before Hot Mass itself. Hot Mass is like both a party and a place, but the building that we're in and the membership club that exists there was established decades ago for gay men and continues to serve like the gay community in Pittsburgh. And you can see in like a lot of the people that book at Hot Mass and how we kind of organize as crews that we're like reflective of and extremely respectful of that history. And in the same way, it's a self-defined space. So I just wanted to do like a little commercial break on some history. You'll see these popping up occasionally. But social clubs are definitely not a new thing. They're a very old thing, and they were put in place to protect certain groups, and they were also initially related to unions. And one thing I found out when I moved here that I was very stoked about was that the oldest social club in the United States is right here in Kansas City. It's the Mutual Musicians Foundation. It's a Black union and jazz club on the 18th and Vine district. And so this is just a photo of the space. It looks the exact same right now. And that's a photo on the right of their social club license that was signed in 1917. So just a couple quick other examples about spaces. If you do have the opportunity to get into like pop-up spaces or find yourself in like maybe an overwhelming situation where a developer or someone's asking you to like do something cool in their new building, there's a lot of ways that you can approach this. I was always super skeptical about developers and still am, but there's an opportunity, I think, to have like cool responses to spaces and perhaps Robin Hood them for a week or a month in order to let artists do some really cool shit. I think you have to be really careful about those relationships, but that's for another time. One of the spaces that we got into was a former school. You can see they were trying to make them into some cool lofts. And because it was a small space, a lot of the ideas that we had were around like overpopulating it, like because our legal capacity was so low. So one approach to that was scanning everybody when they came in and creating kind of a stage design with textiline where we were continually populating the space with more and more digital bodies. Another project that I think resonates today in some ways was getting into this bank downtown. This building was one of the most overwhelming projects to work with, but in the center of the building, there's this beautiful atrium that has really interesting like acoustic qualities. And at the time I was, watching a lot of ASMR videos, and something that was really great about this atrium was that you could whisper and hear someone very far away pretty clearly. I had also been talking to Latrobe Avedon, who was an avatar, and trying to think of ways that we could do an artist project together. And ultimately this became a collaboration between two avatars. It was a collaboration between Brittany ASMR, who is a voice artist and ASMR artist, and Latrobe Avedon. And they created an ASMR therapy inside of this physical space. So the relationship between the therapy that they designed and the architecture of the space, I think, still resonates with me a lot today. So history break. We know that like people have been doing pop-up parties in lots of spaces all over the world for many, many decades. But I think a lot of us maybe know that like the 90s was a really big time for that. And a lot of that had to do with like really restrictive laws and policies that were made around gathering. And also there were a lot of extra laws instituted around beat-driven music at that time. So, ravers and people trying to find a place to go were making their own out of it. And this is a video from Pittsburgh from '95 that I think is amazing. And the story behind the party is that people couldn't find a place to go, but the loophole that they found was to like file a permit with the city to film a movie. And since in the 90s, Pittsburgh was like just getting its feet wet and being like the third Hollywood or whatever, they were issuing filmmaking permits all the time. And so they didn't really check this one. And they were able to shut down an entire tunnel in Pittsburgh. And then since they brought cameras and documented the whole thing, they could justify it as a movie shoot. And I think that how they made this film is really cheeky and great. I just want to share some moments.
Many local residents are upset this morning following an overnight party in our area. A dance party was held in the Corliss tunnels overnight. The tunnels were closed after a group of people organized this dance party known as a rave. While residents near the tunnels complained about the loud music, and they were angry that a party was allowed to be held in the middle of the night. Police were called, but a permit had been filed for that party, so it all was legal. Organizers say it was held as an alternative to the typical night spot.
This is about getting a bunch of people having a good time. Pretty much the alternative for the club scene. We're tired of the people getting just drinking alcohol and going there for the bar, and it's time to have a little fun.
About 1,500 people showed up for last night's party that kicked off around 10 last night and ran until 7 this morning.
Okay. So there's a couple things I really love about this home video. Is one, the caption "other opinions." I like how it flips around, how local news was covering events like this, and it really just took that one back. And I also really think it's important to notice that there was a need to get away from alcohol culture. So that's legitimate. I mean, people might be doing different things, but I think bar culture still presents a big problem, which is why I think figuring out ways to do parties like this or gather people in other locations by using loopholes, I want you to do it legally, but I really encourage looking really behind the scenes and figuring out what are the legal loopholes, what are things like social clubs and other ways of organizing that can allow us to gather together the way that we want to.
Sorry. Okay, so I think we have to be a little bit mindful of the time. We have 15 minutes left approximately. So maybe the last kind of answer can be a little bit shorter, so we have time for the open discussion part. So from your experience, as you have been engaged with a lot of collectives, what has being engaged with them brought to your practice that might otherwise not be there now?
Yeah, so this is a photo of the GFX collective. This is a picture of a lot of folks behind the scenes that have worked with me on VIA and other projects over the years, and a bunch of guests. This was a special event that we did. And I think even though we were running events, they were still very male dominated, and the behind the scenes folks are often just still very, overlooked. Who's on the stage really is what captures people's attention. So I think number one, in organizing this way, we were really interested in putting the focus on behind the scenes folks, organization, and also mentorship. We noticed that there were a lot of people in Pittsburgh that had expressed wanting to learn how to produce music or just generally learn how to organize events. And there really wasn't a mechanism to do that specifically for women and non-binary people. So we just took that up upon ourselves. Having worked together for a long time, our power dynamics changed once we organized this way. I think it allowed for more horizontal leadership. It allowed for mentorship between us. So if someone was used to being in the role of a mentor, they became a mentee. And that was just by the nature of kind of reconfiguring. These are just photos from our events. I mean, we did, like I said, we were really interested in the idea of ownership and advancement. So we did a lot of workshops that were around free gear sharing. And we really gave a lot of opportunities to people that wouldn't have otherwise maybe played out at a club. But I think an important part here is kind of the ritual of photography for us on social media, because just being able to say we were here tonight and really making sure that we are documenting everybody that's part of it. And this is just a few of hundreds of photos at this point, just became part of our practice. History lesson. Self-documentation is super important, obviously, for marginalized groups. And even though we didn't model ourselves off of crews from the 90s, I think it's important to know that that's a time when crews also became very strong. And that was from hip hop culture, but it was also coming from Latinx ditch parties that kind of bubbled up in LA. And I totally recommend you checking out this project. It's called Map Points by Guadalupe Rosales. I think looking at some of the documentation of these ditch crews and then maybe reading her statement for a second would be great. So I'll give you a minute to do that.
Lauren, would you afterwards feel comfortable moving on to the last part of the presentation?
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect.
I just don't want to speak for other people. And I can always share these slides with folks afterwards if you want. So let's bump. I'll share this with you later. I'm going to jump past these if that's okay. Do you want me to move on to here?
Yes.
All right. So now we're in the present day. And things are really weird. So where would you like to start, Megan?
I think we're going to talk a little bit about the fact, like, what is challenging right now. I think we all know it's really, really hard to be engaged with our communities at the moment. Most of the options that we have are only online. And so Lauren has been so kind as to come up with a collection of like quick examples of how people are currently doing their communities in survival mode. May that be fully online, alternative hybrid modes of community, or coming up and transforming their communities as a whole. And we're gonna show you those examples really quickly, and then going to like an open Q&A/discussion.
Cool. Yeah, really quick. I use this image just because I think it's absurd. If you read the caption, you know, we always have a fascination, I think, with like creating futuristic objects that are just never going to be. But I mean, hopefully we don't have to wear things like this. But I also really prefer this one from the Apple repository and IO, who is part of your cohort. All right. So online, I think we've all been either participating or creating these. So we see folks creating custom platforms, whether that's like a URL or completely changing their websites or giving their websites over to other people. We really see a huge proliferation of like repurposing. And this is, I'm speaking specifically about like more like gathering functions for artistic expression or music or partying or things like that. So yeah, we see those happening in Zoom and Minecraft, Fortnite. A lot of people doing DIY socials. A lot of people kind of activating mutual aid online, and then really seeing an extreme boom in the streaming biz, which is important to note here because it's potentially creating a lot of problems for people to do that kind of their own broadcasting. Here are just some examples of stuff that's been going on lately. Club Q is a project out of Toronto. It's a weekly party that I believe is still going on, that started like very quickly, attracted like I think a couple hundred people, and now has like a rotation of like thousands of guests and participants. As a queer party on Zoom, I just wanted to bring this up because knowing the problems of Zoom, like its encryption issues, recording of people, a lot of folks are expressing themselves on here, and so there might be some privacy issues. And also Zoom's getting Zoom bombed all the time, so it's not necessarily a safe space. Minecraft, you find like a lot of festivals are partnering up with creative groups. CTM Berlin just did a recent one with Club Matryoshka in Minecraft. Put our hot mass in there. Like, you know, we're trying our hand at this, just using Twitch, even though we don't think it's great. Like, it's kind of the free available thing to us. And then you see artists like Kitty Cash kind of going totally avatar mode and really holding on to their social following and completely changing the presentation of themselves as an artist to engage there. So I just wanted to like have this quick hit list of positives and negatives. You know, there's two sides to every coin on this one. But these are what I see as kind of being immediately problematic and or maybe a way why online performance could be better for us right now. This is a hefty one, but just quick note, like if you haven't watched like the Travis Scott Fortnite performance, please do. It's just bananas. But what I'd like to show behind that is just the investments that are being made in these types of online performances. So, you know, I don't necessarily think it's like the utopia that maybe it was pitched as being. Also, just to note, like there are groups that have been doing performances like this, like Open Pit has been doing this for a couple of years now. But it is big business. In real life, we found people kind of pivoting, trying to do offsite or off-grid performances and ways of gathering, just pivoting the activities within their spaces. Like, for example, doing a lot of food redistribution or mutual aid distribution out of their spaces. There's been an increase in illegal gatherings, and then a lot of places and groups reliant on physical spaces are no more. These are just some screenshots of organizations that are active out your way. You can also see that I went from 50% battery to 1% in like 3 hours. I don't know what I was doing, but That's like ridiculous that I still got that screenshot in. But yeah, so Beverly's is like, they've had to shut their doors permanently, very sad, and they've kind of taken their brand and their curatorial direction elsewhere. Performance Space New York is doing a lot of like mutual aid work. I mean, they all are. And then Abrams just announced their like hybrid-ish online in-person socially distanced program. I think it's really important to note the connection between nightlife and like social movements. Mohammed Fayez, who does all the design for Poppy Juice, which is a party you're probably familiar with in New York, designed the poster for the Brooklyn Liberation March, which was huge. I'm sure many of you were there. And I think that like this transference of like nightlife culture into like popular culture and then into like a canon of archives is a really important thing to watch. And it also is really important when it comes to just organizing in general. And this picture I think is really potent because the only place we can legally organize right now is through protest. Just as far as like illegal gatherings and RIP, I think I just want to make a point that public policy and like health is also a form of policing. And so we're just seeing a lot of issues around organizing. And here with like doing really high fines for people that are organizing, I think, again, like the legalities and policies around organizing are changing rapidly. And you have initiatives in the United States like Save Our Stages that's trying to actually change legislation and have funding released, like the Restart Act and the Save Our Stages Act, like specifically directed at nightlife communities and arts and performance communities. And with that, I think all the examples that I've shown you have, you know, whether they're old projects or like recent things that people are trying to do in survival mode, they all maybe have threads of ways that we can activate and connect with one another right now. And I would encourage like an open discussion for questions or thinking about hybrid modes. And I'm gonna leave this photo up while we chat. I think we can also consider non-humans in our network. And I think this is a really beautiful performance that recently happened and very inspiring to me personally and my big plant friend behind me. So with that, hopefully I'm keeping under time. Mia, if you wanna jump in.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for the talk. I think we have a couple of minutes and we can go a little bit over time with like a Q&A. So in case you have any questions, please submit them right now. Yeah, thank you, Lauren. It's really, really, really great. It's lovely. Maybe in the meanwhile, while people are typing, you could ask like one of my questions. You have mentioned in the context of collaborations that it sometimes allows you to like have horizontal hierarchies. Mm-hmm. But since a lot of artists at our age or like people who come from company sides like are not used to horizontal hierarchies, like what are the challenges you have experienced with that, or do you have any kind of tips or strategies how to encourage those hierarchies?
Yeah, this is hard because it's really particular to each group, right? I think like for me, I'll just speak for myself, like participating in a group as a collective, like one, I remain very focused on what our shared outcome is. Like we all have like a shared goal in many ways. And so the road to get there is definitely not going to be led by one person. And in that sense, there might be a lot of like movement around one idea and maybe not action happening as quickly as you'd want to, because in like a vertical hierarchy, you can really get things done and delegate. I think it's way more process oriented, but kind of knowing and setting a goal or some kind of like clear output, you know, for example, like we want to run 10 workshops this year and we want to make them all led by local people. Something really simple as that can really give you a goalpost to like work towards. And then the way you're going to get there is probably going to be a negotiation every single time.
Thank you. That's actually a really, really great answer. I love that. Yeah. Okay, so far there's no questions. Then I'm just gonna budge in with another one. I can ask questions all night. That's fine. So I know this is very specific and this is probably only your experience, but what has your way of keeping skin in the game and like showing presence and being there when opportunities open up themselves been? Like what has your strategy been so far? Like, did it just happen by being involved with things?
Maybe ask it in a slightly different way, because I'm not sure how to.
Okay.
Try me again.
What have been the moments where you felt like, yes, I'm in the right space right now to do the things I want to do, and how did you got there?
Well, when I look back on certain projects, like in the moment, I did not feel good about them. Like the space 6119, I was like, oh no, like what? This is terrifying, you know? I think all of them, and this is for me, have had like some element of fear. Like when you get kind of that like pitter patter, you're like, oh, there's, I think like, and that can mean a number of things. Like, I think it could mean that there are stakes involved. That could mean that it's like going to challenge you to like work differently, and you need to like step into that. I'm not trying to encourage people to do things that are reckless or harmful, but like, I think that feeling of like anxiety or fear, as for me, has been like the like, boop, like you're onto something. Oftentimes it like plays into my inferiority complex, you know, like where the minute, if my first response to something is like, oh, I can't do that, like that's another signal that it's like, go, do it, try it. That's just personally for me, as far as like feelings of motivation, or trusting your gut, maybe in a weird way. I think that like in like scouring the landscape and trying to see where opportunities can happen, I think that that's really important in understanding the context of where you live. I mean, like the projects that I started in Pittsburgh, I was looking for gaps, you know, like a big motivator was like, why isn't the arts community and the nightlife community interacting more? Like, why aren't they creating together more? And just trying to solve that problem, like through iteration after iteration of event or matchmaking or whatever it was, like really just trying to see some outcome of those scenes like blend over time.
Okay, so we have like a couple of questions and requests here now. Fine. Could you please unshare your screen so we can see the whole crowd if somebody has the video on? And we have a question from Bina Lee. Bina, do you want to ask the question out loud, or should I read it? Okay, I think I'm going to read it in this case. How do you promote these projects in the spaces for people to engage?
Like, well, the past projects, social media was like super important. I think with, and also utilizing every network that's involved. Like that's a strategy also for like, say, crossing, doing interinstitutional like partnerships, or bringing together like seemingly disparate groups of people, is we all have our promotional networks and we all handle them different ways. Some folks are really strong on social media, other folks are better through text, other folks are better through a newsletter or their website. And I think like that really is where the sweet spot is to really like gain some momentum in getting people to see what you're doing, and to give it a chance. I also think that there is like, on the flip side, like spaces that are like word of mouth or more just like internal communities that seem to get a following. I think that the goal shouldn't always be like more. Sometimes it's more about like a depth of communication with the folks that you're serving anyway. So I would encourage people to like, you know, if they're coming up to a point of promoting certain events and something about it just feels like going bigger isn't necessarily the right thing, I would encourage finding different ways of communicating privately with the people that you're already engaging with.
Thank you. So we have another question from one of our guests. I'm interested in how some people or groups are trying to recreate pre-COVID social gatherings digitally, and how others are kind of leaning into the new medium to create new social experiences. Do you have any kind of personal experiences or examples that you have come across?
Oh, I'm very interested in this too. Every day I change my opinion. Like I'm a streaming hater right now. I'm just burnt on it, and yet like I can't shake it, you know. I think that trying to simulate like an in-person experience is always going to fail. Like that you're going to fail your own expectations, and you can never match someone else's. So I think it is a really great opportunity to step away from trying to simulate or recreate like what was there before, and find different ways of entering it again, I guess. I'll give an example of like things I've been trying to do in the background. Cause like, I don't know, I still make things sometimes. One, like this was early on in COVID, but like I made a mix for nowadays, and instead of just doing an audio mix, like I kind of gave myself a big project to like to get hold of a drone and to make basically like a 2-hour music video of like all these spaces and places in Pittsburgh that are shuttered. And at that time for me, like I needed that just like for my own sense of memory. I needed it as a way to like get away from the expectation that I had to perform on camera in like a DJ in front of a camera. You know, I actually like casted myself like in the scenes in weird ways, but you know, I just really kind of took it apart and didn't approach it as like a DJ set or a performance set like for a live stream. And I think, yeah, anytime you're kind of up against the choice of like, how do I stream or share something digitally, like creatively, I would just say, don't try to recreate what you had before in physical life.
Nice. Thank you. I think this is a really, really good answer as well. Yeah, I think it's important to kind of explore those potentials that we have with those new needs of operating, let's say it like this. Okay, I think we don't really have any more questions right here. In this case, this concludes our talk. Lauren, thanks again for being here. Thanks for joining us. The talk has been lovely. It feels also like the perfect fit just to be like at the end of a festival that we've done in order to like explore what it means to like come together digitally, since we can't physically. And I hope that everybody is leaving like excited and kind of enriched to build their own clubs and communities and support the ones that they're already in or like part of.
Yeah, I would like to say like the ones you had physically are not gone. You have to refine them. So please don't feel super sad about what's going on right now. It sucks. But it's an opportunity to get super weird.
Yeah.
And it is, I would just like to also say, like, it as safely as you can, like explore the places around you, and try to find ways to have like relationships with those places, even if like right now they're kind of ghosts of what they once were. We need places to come back to. We cannot always exist online. And so it's important to kind of make sure that we go full circle, like that our digital activities connect back again to our physical communities and our physical spaces.
Yeah. Wiser words have not been spoken. Like, this is so
I try.
beautiful.
I don't know.
Beautiful said. Okay. Thank you, Lauren. Again, thanks for everybody being here. As a reminder, this has been a part of TELEPRESENCE, our larger cyber expo. And to our lovely audience, thanks for being here again and having us like joined throughout the last 3 days. And as mentioned before, the exhibition that we're hosting is still going to be online, as well as the recorded talks and events and workshops will be also available on our website. So go to mfadt.space, have a look. We will share the presentation. We will maybe like make even a bullet list of points that you can like figure out on how to like support and build your communities and platforms. And yeah, thanks for joining us. We're looking forward to see you in person, on and offline, as soon as possible. And in the meanwhile, like if you have any questions, reach out and take good care of yourself and others. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. And also thanks to Rosa for organizing everything.
Thank you, Rosa.
Yeah.
Keeping me on my game.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, good night.
All right, cool.
Have a nice evening. I'm gonna sign off now. I'm gonna go